9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What is your story?
What is my story? Okay. Well, my name's Jess, and I am from Toronto originally. And I have always been that person who didn't really know where I fit. I think that really kind of is the way that things started. And so my background is my dad is Chinese. So I'm half Chinese, and I grew up with all of these adults constantly asking me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I never had an answer. It was one of those things that I never had an answer. And so as a 4-year old, I used to tell people that I was going to be beautiful and that's just the only plans that I had. And so, growing up, even in through university, I went to U of T. I studied African and Caribbean studies. Still had no idea what I was going to do. And when I was 21 and I came out of university, my mom's a real estate agent. My dad's a doctor. And I didn't know what to do. I was like, I have no plan. I have a degree that I can do pretty much nothing with. And what am I going to do? So my mom said, why don't you start with real estate? Just kind of see what it brings you, see what you think. I think you'll be good at it. So I got my real estate license when I was 21 and I sold real estate. And that's just sort of the way that everything kind of evolved and everything started, right? Because it was the first time in my life, first of all, that I had any money. And second of all, that I had any control, right? I went to a private girls' school in Toronto, lots of rules. I was an athlete, lots of rules. I had a Chinese dad, lots of rules. So it was just kind of the first time in my life that I was like, oh, I actually have some control over my life. What am I going to do with it? Right. And so, I was super irresponsible when I first started selling real estate. I think I did one of my very first deals and I got my first big commission check. And I'm pretty sure I bought shoes with it. Like I just went out and just bought a whole bunch of things that I just could never buy before. Right. And then slowly but surely I got, some grounding and I started buying property. And I bought my first property, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. And I really realized that what I wanted to do was, help people build wealth that way. So that's sort of where it started. I was a real estate agent for 14 years, and loved it. Built myself a great big business in Toronto, which was, successful for real estate agents. And, I got married. I had, I built myself a nice little life, and I was very happy, very content. And then I realized that I wanted to do something different. So I started consulting, and that's just sort of how things have just sort of evolved. And I mean, there's so many other tiny little elements of my story along the way, but that's sort of, I never wanted to follow rules anymore. And I always knew that when I got out of school that I didn't want to work for somebody, that I wanted to build something that was kind of my own and that I had more control. And honestly, that was one of the major reasons why I exited the real estate, like actually selling real estate, was because I still felt too tied down. Even though I was running my own business, I still felt really tied down to Toronto. And the very first thing that I did after I started selling real estate is I moved to LA for 6 months. Just because I could. It was really just one of those, I can, so I'm going to, and I'm going to exercise this freedom. And I think that that's really been a really prevalent theme in my life was I will follow rules when I'm supposed to. I'm a very good rule follower, but I fight against the rules as well, right? So, after all of that, all I really wanted was freedom. And I just wanted, and it's funny because I'm still here. Like I went and I did this thing. I traveled a whole bunch. I came back and I'm still in Toronto. So as much as I thought that I wanted to kind of have all this freedom, I think it was more the feeling of freedom than it was actually the freedom itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. So I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
You're really good at following rules,
Yeah,
but then there's also like this almost like rebel side.
definitely.
But it seems like in order to build a big business and to be really successful, you almost have to create your own rules.
Mhm.
So do you like the rules that you create for yourself? How does that play into the dynamic?
That's an awesome question, actually. So a lot of the rules that I've created for myself, I mean, I'm also very structured, and I use a lot of ritual and a lot of, I have to have structure in my life. Otherwise, God only knows what would happen. But I find that my rules evolve. They evolve and they change, and the structures that I have within my life and within my business, they change. In the beginning, I needed to have accountability and structure and things like that, just to sort of get myself moving forward. But I find that the bigger my business grows, the more team, the more support that I have underneath me, the more flexibility that I have with that rigid schedule, with the rules that I have around the way that I do things. So as much as I have rules, I find that they change. I read a new book, and the way that I interpret that book, or something that I learn from that book, or listening to a podcast, or you never know, right? Like there's so much information that we constantly have access to, that someone may say something, or I may read or hear something that completely changes the way that I look at part of my business or part of my life. And that's, I think, the other thing that I love so much, is that there is that fluidity with the rules themselves, right? Like there's a book that I really love. It's called Willpower Doesn't Work, and it's by Benjamin Hardy. And I remember the first time that I read that book, I thought, interesting. So I started experimenting, and I started using environment in different ways, and working in different locations, and I structured my mornings a little bit differently, and I just played around with it until I found something that really works. Because I'm a really big believer that not every structure works for every person, right? There's going to be, and you hear this all the time, right? Like there's these incredibly successful people, billionaires, things like that, that some people get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then other people get up at 11 o'clock in the morning. And I really don't think that there's any one set of rules that is the kind of the framework or the pathway or the key to success. I think that we all kind of have to figure out what works best for us. And even with my team, like my team has different hours, different schedules, different things like that. And I think that we have to work around what works for everybody, because what works for me may not work for the next person.
That makes a lot of sense. And I love that it's almost like an evolution of, especially hearing your journey of creating something like a foundational structure. And then as you learn more things, or you figure out this thing, or you see that thing, then you can kind of add it into your routine, and tweak and play with it, and really figure out what works best. So when you first started with these, like these foundational rules, or these parameters, if you will, where did they start, and then how have they evolved to what they are now, like the specifics of the actual rules themselves?
Yeah, so I would say in the beginning, it was very much, I just kind of was trying to model other people around me that kind of had what I wanted, right? So things like, I had a mentor really early on, and he had specific times every day that he had blocked off to read. And so I did the same thing. I kind of modeled my schedule, and I modeled my structure around things that had worked for him. And then I met more people, and I kind of started to dive into myself a little bit more. And it wasn't only about sort of the external of everything that was going on around me, and business and building and things like that. And I realized that I needed to kind of reconnect and take care of me. So, it started with journaling. So I would wake up every morning, and I would journal, and then I would work out, and then I would kind of go about my regular day. And then things gets kind of added in there, right? So then it turned into meditation in the morning, and then journaling, and then my workout. And then honestly, my morning routine over the years got longer, and then it got shorter. Right. So there were things that I added in, and then I realized, I was like, now I'm feeling pressure for all these things that I've added in, almost like I'm ticking these boxes every morning that were intended to serve me, but now I kind of feel like I'm serving them. So a lot of it became, well, when I feel like journaling, I'll journal in the morning, but I don't have to journal every morning. And, and I think that it starts with the structure. I meditated every day for a year, and every single morning for a year. And then I woke up one morning and I was like, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. So now I meditate some mornings, but I have a hypnosis that I listen to at night. So it kind of has spread itself out in kind of a different way. And even with my work schedule, and it's funny because for someone who has owned their own business for so long, I have worked a 9 to 5, 10 to 6 schedule for years. And one day I woke up at my regular time and I thought, I'm really tired today. I'm not going to get up right now. And it kind of, and for me, like I felt guilt around it. I felt all kinds of emotion around it, that I was doing something wrong, because I had my own self-inflicted rules that at the time maybe weren't serving me. So I slept in that day. But then I realized that sometimes I like to work at night. So it just sort of, and that's what I love about it. And just like you said, like there's this evolution around, there's no set rules. And as we get older and as we learn new things and as we go through different phases of our lives, things change. And I don't have kids, but I know that when I do, or if and when I do, my schedules are going to have to change again. And so, I mean, you never know. So growing up, I was a competitive rower. And so my schedule, for 15 years was get up at 20 after 4, go to practice, then go about the rest of your day. And, I went through a training program or a business building program at the beginning of this year. And one of the keys, the teachings in it was to get up really early and do all of these affirmations. And there was this whole mindset protocol around it. And I tried it and I did it for 2 months. I'm definitely someone who gives things a try. I did it for 2 months. And at the end of the 2 months, I thought, this mindset, this whole morning routine is making me more anxious rather than less. So I scrapped it. And I remember thinking, like, you got up at 20 after 4 for 15 years, you can get up at 4:30. But I realized that I haven't gotten up at 20 after 4 in at least 10 years. So maybe it wasn't serving me anymore. And I guess my own rhythm has changed, and I'm really not an early morning person anymore. And so I don't have to be.
I love that. I actually tried the whole waking up at 4:30 a.m. thing too. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of cool because when you wake up, then I like to go immediately to the gym, hit a workout. And then, I like to read while I'm at the gym, or listen to audiobooks rather. And so, I was feeding my mind, getting my body right. And then like you get home and then, or you get to the office and then you start working. And by the time like 9 o'clock rolls around, you've gotten so much done. You feel like you're on fire. So it's awesome. But then on the flip side of that, it's like, well, if you are going to do that, I'm the kind of person where I really I need my 8 hours.
Yep.
I have to have 8 hours of sleep or else I just feel out of whack. Mm-hmm. And so to do that, you then have to go to sleep at 8:30 at night. It's like, well, it's really hard to spend time with your family. Or if you happen to go out to eat one night, then it's like your whole schedule is just off whack. But yeah, I'm like you. I try stuff too.
100%. So that's one of the things that bothered me about that 2 months where I started getting up really early again, is that I was going to bed I was in bed at, you start getting ready to go to bed at 8:30. And my husband was like, I feel like we're just passing. We're just kind of passing each other, and we work together. So it's one of those things that we were working together, but we weren't actually spending married time together. We weren't actually spending any quality time together. And it definitely felt like a loss. And so there was no way that I was going to get him to go to bed at 8:30 and get up at 4:30 in the morning with me. So it was honestly like, that was one of the reasons as well, is that I was missing that time, that, off work time, because he was still working until 6. So even though I was getting up and I was getting all of this stuff done so early in the morning, I was still working until 6. So what had actually happened was my work day had just gotten way longer, which at the end of the day, I don't need to work that many hours in order to accomplish what I need to. So my productivity went down because I had all this time and I didn't have that, that eustress to kind of get things that I needed to get done in a period of time, so that I had that off time, that free time with him. And I'm a really big believer that eustress is incredibly important in terms of productivity. So what was happening with me is I was getting the same amount of work done, but just in a longer period of time. So really, at the end of the day, what's the point?
Yeah. So I'm fascinated. What is eustress? I've never heard that before.
Okay. So this is a concept that there's a couple of books that I've read about this, and it's something that I love. So they say that there's two kinds of stress. There's distress, and then there's eustress. So distress is bad stress. It's the kind that like makes us anxious and makes us unhappy and uncomfortable and things like that, like financial stress and, like sickness and illness and things like that. Eustress is, I'll give you an example. And this is an example I read in a book, and I can't remember what book it was, but it's the idea that, there's someone who has to pick up their kids at school at 3:30 every day. And that is that's a solid commitment. So he works from 9 a.m. to 3 o'clock, and everything that he needs to get done has to be done in that period of time. And so what that idea of eustress is to kind of put that time crunch or that stress, that limited stress upon yourself to make you more productive and more focused. Another example that I've heard that I think some people use is they'll charge their computer and go to a coffee shop to work, but they won't bring their charger. So they have a certain amount of battery life, and they have to get everything that they need to get done before their computer dies.
That's awesome. That's awesome, because it's setting that artificial limit, but I mean, it's a real limit if you enforce it. So like, I really do think that work will take the time that you give it. So if you just give it less time, but then you have to get that stuff done. That's brilliant.
Yeah. And I think, I've monitored myself with this too. When I give myself too much time to get something done, I will click around. I'll pick up my phone a whole bunch of times. I'll scroll on Facebook or look at this or look at that. I'll allow my tabs to stay open so that notifications come in and I get that kind of that dopamine hit of that distraction. Right. But if I don't, and I have a limited amount of time and I know that I have to get this done in this time period, I'll close out all my tabs. I'll have my one tab open to get finished what I need to get finished. And I'm a lot more productive. And then I end up with so much more free time to do something else, whether it's another work activity, whether it's, another job or another task that I actually get finished, or it's the free time. Right. And I think that that's something that so many people struggle with, especially people who own their own businesses. They feel like they have to have this accountability and they have to have, I'm going to work today from 9 to 5. I'm going to work from 10 to 6 or whatever that time period is. And it becomes less about what do I actually need to get done to move the needle in my business? And it becomes more about if I'm going to be successful, I have to work hard. And working hard doesn't have to be the same for everybody, right? Like there's days that I can get everything that I need to get done in 4 hours. And then there's other days that it's going to take 9 hours. And that's okay as long as it's actual focused, productive time.
I think that's really powerful. So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about when you were growing up. And people would ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Why do you think you defaulted to the answer that you did?
So I think that I felt a lot of pressure. I definitely felt a lot of pressure. My dad's a doctor, and he's not just, he's also a specialist. He's also, you know, growing up, there was always this expectation that I would be successful. But I think that the idea of what success meant in my head was very different. So, you know, from when you come from a, or maybe not everybody, but for me, you know, I came from a family where professional success, doctors, lawyers, things like that were what you did. And, you know, being an entrepreneur, owning a business, having ideas and kind of going against the norm, that wasn't what we did. But I think at the same time, even really, really early on, I think that I knew that I didn't want to follow that path. I couldn't see myself working in a company or, you know, working in a law firm or anything like that. And it was actually, it took, my dad has been absolutely wonderful, but it took him some time. And, you know, it was when I first got into real estate, it was very much, when are you going to go to law school? Or when are you going to, essentially, I don't think he ever said this, but it was the whole idea of, when are you going to get a real job? And that was really hard to kind of break through. And he's incredibly proud of me now. And, but it definitely, it took time. And, you know, my brother went down that route. I have a younger brother who is a certified genius, so much smarter than I could ever hope to be. But he went down that more medical route. He specializes in neuropharmacology. Whereas, you know, they would have conversations and I understood none of it. So even as a really, like, even as a little kid, first of all, I was always really aware that my brother was smarter than I was, or sort of textbook smarter than I was. And so I think that there was almost a level of insecurity that was, and even as like a really little kid, I was never aware of that as when I was that young. But looking back at that now, I think there was an insecurity behind it of, I really don't know where I fit. And I really don't, I know that I'm not as smart as Jeffrey, who's my little brother. I'm not as smart as Jeffrey. And he's, you know, he excels at school more than I do. I was a great student. He was a phenomenal student. And so it was always, I think, comparison. And I think comparison is incredibly dangerous for kids. I think it's dangerous in general, because we're all, you know, you hear that, you hear that that saying every once in a while, that if you judge a fish on its ability to fly, that it will always be a failure. And that's sort of how I felt, right? I felt growing up that I was that fish that was expected to fly, and I knew that I couldn't fly, and I knew that I wasn't ever going to be a good flyer, but I didn't really know where I fit. So my default was, well, if people think I'm beautiful, then someone will marry me. And someone will take care of me. And I think that that was kind of the default, because I really didn't see how I was going to be successful in the world. And it took me a while. It definitely took me a while. And I think that I was an early bloomer, but also a late bloomer, because I did the default. Honestly, I loved real estate, and I built a powerful business in real estate. But I didn't really figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up until I was like well into my 30s. So, you know, it was just one of those things that I guess I never really knew where I fit.
Did you do like introspection or like personal development or work on yourself or something to really figure out what you wanted to do when you grew up, or you know, figure out where you really did fit? Or was it something that just one day it just clicked and it all changed for you? Like, what was that really like for you?
Yeah. So the journey away from real estate and towards my current business was, it was a very difficult time. It
Hmm.
was definitely one of those I fought something that I knew. I kind of knew it inside, and I fought it for, I think, a little bit too long. And it started out as just kind of this inkling of, you know, kind of losing my fire. My dad calls it my sparkle. I just sort of felt like I was losing some of my gusto for what I was doing. And it got louder and louder and louder. And honestly, it turned into anxiety. And I started struggling with some anxiety around what was sort of, and I think that I'm a really big believer that for some people and in some circumstances, anxiety can be like a misalignment of something in your life. And I ended up with anxiety. And my husband and I, we were in Hawaii. We were taking a vacation. We were taking a break. I was surrounded by I think Maui is just one of the most beautiful places in the world. And we were driving, we had music playing, the windows were down. We were having this great time. And I started to cry. And he looked over at me and he said, "What's wrong?" And I was like, I don't know. I don't think I want to sell real estate anymore. And that was just sort of, but I ignored it. You know, it was one of those things that I knew it, I felt it, and I ignored it. But it got louder and louder and louder. And the symptoms of my anxiety got louder and louder and louder until I really couldn't ignore them anymore. And I took a trip alone. On this path, I was doing personal development work. I was doing a lot of journaling. I was doing a lot of kind of introspection. I was really, but it's very difficult to say I've spent 14 years building this business that no longer is what is right for me. Scariest decision, 100% scariest decision of my life. And so it was in the morning, and I looked at my husband and I said, I have an invitation to go to Bali. I'm going to leave tonight. And he was like, nope. My husband is wonderful. He's like, no problem. Go pack. I'll book your flight. You can leave this afternoon. So I went to Bali. I wasn't there for very long. I spent, 5 days. It's just such a different place and such a different environment. And I kind of tapped into me again. I spent a lot of time journaling and just sort of being there and kind of experiencing this nomadic. There's so many digital nomads in Bali that I was in this like completely different world. And I called him, I think, on day 3, and I was like, okay, I'm done. I was like, I'm done. We need to figure out what the next step is. And and I think that this is just kind of was me being silly a little bit in the beginning. I initially was like, I'm going to go into fitness coaching. I'm going to go down the fitness route. I'm going to help people get healthy, because that's really for me what's been so pivotal in my life and giving me the empowerment for me to be able to make change. And I took on a couple of clients, wonderful people but then I realized I was like, this isn't really what I want to do. And I think what I was doing is I was rebelling against the real estate side of things. But then I kind of came back around. I work with real estate agents now, and that's where kind of my new business was kind of born out of. But it was one of the hardest transitions and one of the hardest decisions, because it was terrifying. Everything in our lives, our lifestyle, our bills, we had adjusted for the most part, we'd adjusted our lifestyle to the income that we knew that we had from the real estate business. And to start something from scratch was terrifying for both of us, because it wasn't only me, it was him as well. I made this decision. I had this existential crisis, and he was sort of he kind of came along with me. It was my decision and my struggle that he just sort of said, okay, you figure out what you want to do next and I'll come along, which I'm incredibly grateful for it. I'm incredibly lucky that I have someone like that. But yeah, like that's a crisis, and that's a change that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I'm grateful for it now, but the actual time itself was just horrifyingly scary.
When you first started to feel that inkling,
Mm-hmm.
and it started to just gradually increase and increase and increase. Do you think you had to go through all of the waiting and the pain and that whole transition, or do you think right when you felt it, you could have just pivoted and then it would have been the same? Like, do you feel like all of that was necessary, or could you have shortcutted it and avoided a lot of the pain?
It's interesting. I think that now, if something like that happened, that I would recognize it a lot earlier and I would be able to make a pivot or make a change with a lot more ease and probably a lot more grace. But I think at the time I needed to go through it because I didn't really recognize what it was. And I'd never, I mean, I was practically a child when I got into real estate. And, you know, it was all I knew. And I didn't really know that I really at the time, I didn't even know that the business that I have, I didn't even know that this world existed. And so, and really when I was that young, it probably didn't, right? So I'm 35. I got my license when I was 21. And, you know, if you really think about it, when I got my real estate license, I got a pager. I didn't have a smartphone. We didn't have we didn't have the technology. You and I would not be doing this right now, right? There was no podcast. There was no anything like that. And so it was really very much about, you know, just I used the tools that I had. This is going to date me like crazy, but when I first started actually prospecting in my real estate business, everyone else was still out there door knocking and cold calling. And there was this new thing called Facebook that didn't have a marketplace or anything like that. But I just started building my business on Facebook. And at the time, no one was doing that. And so it was just, you know, when I think back on it, when that inkling first started happening, I think that I equated it to burnout. I think that I originally just thought, you know what, you've worked really hard and you're tired. And I think that it just sort of grew and grew and grew. And the fulfillment piece for me, I think it was what was really missing. I wasn't serving the right people. And not by no means. I think that real estate agents, the good ones, that they do it's a wonderful service and they take really good care of people through that process. But for me, I think that it was a misalignment of who I was serving. And I think that I'm grateful for it now. I always talk about, you know, you don't want to talk about the mess until you've cleaned it up, but I'm grateful for the mess now. Because I know that the next time around, if there is a next time around, it won't hurt as much, and I'll recognize it a lot earlier. But honestly, for me, it just was a lack of awareness, and I don't even think that I was consciously fighting it. I just had no idea what it was. I'd never been through anything like that before, and now that I have, I would definitely recognize it again, and I think the other thing that I've learned is that I will never say that I'll be doing one thing forever, because I don't know. I expected that I would be in real estate forever. And then something happened that literally wouldn't let me keep going that way, in that direction. So to answer your question, that was a very long-winded answer to your question, but to actually answer your question, I do think that for someone else that the pain may not have been necessary. But I think for me, the first time around, it probably was.
Well, long-winded answers are very much encouraged on the show. So thank you for taking the time to fully expand on that. Because I think about this all the time. And I think about how a lot of people are probably not totally aligned with what they're the best at and what they love and what they can make the most money doing. Mm-hmm. And there's like a lot of pain there that's really hard to identify and say, okay, well, if I just pivot this way and move, you know, to the left 3 spaces and up 4, you know, like it's so hard and almost ethereal to like think about it and to really identify it. but it seems like it probably causes a lot of pain for people. And I was wondering that because if they don't need to go through it, then that's great news. And everybody should hear about that because, that could save them a lot of time and effort and money.
I think that kind of, for a lot of people, it comes down to self-awareness. And I think at the time I wasn't as self-aware. And so I didn't have the tools that I needed in order to recognize it earlier on. I think that someone else in the same situation would probably recognize it much faster. And we would be able to say, okay, I need to make a pivot, or there's something about my current situation that isn't aligning with who I am now and who I've grown into. And I think that that is something that is important, and that I've learned that I need to stay connected to me, and I need to be as self-aware as possible. And sometimes that comes with getting help from people who, have gone through, certain situations as well. Right. I'd never had, I'd had business coaches, but I'd never had anybody that kind of worked with me on me. And so that's something that I do have in my life now. And I think that that's one of the reasons too, why I don't think that I would necessarily suffer through it the same way. But I really believe that it all kind of comes down to self-awareness, and that I was not as self-aware or as in touch with really how I was doing. I was a grinder and a hustler. I worked and I got the work done, and I came second for a long time. And, closer to the end of my real estate career, I had the business that I always wanted. I had the dream real estate business. And that's when I started really taking care of me. And that's when the awareness of sort of what I really needed to do was like really amplified, I think.
When you went to Bali,
yeah,
and you were immersed in that digital nomad lifestyle, did that just speak to you like on a just a deeply personal level? I mean, was that really the final step on the staircase of the transformation, or like how did that really affect you?
I think it really opened my eyes to possibility, right? I think that I'd always looked at business within these parameters of, location and, structure. And honestly, there was this whole world that I wasn't even aware of. So when I got there, you go to any coffee shop in, Canggu, for example, you go to any coffee shop, you go to a cafe or anything throughout the day, and there's 15 people with their computers open that are working. And you think, wow. And then, I started, social media is it's such a wormhole, but it's also such a tool. I started looking for people who were living that life. And, I'm a person of extremes, and I always have to mediate my extremes. So I came home and I was like, we need to move to Bali. And my husband was like, okay. To be honest, like we started looking at real estate. We started looking at what that transition would look like, how to run this new business that we were starting, on opposite time zones. We started looking at everything. And as funny as this sounds, it was actually our cats that's the reason why we never did it, because they have Indonesia, or Bali in particular right now, has a no animals in or out rule. And my cats are 12, and they are the loves of my life. And it was literally, well, we can't bring the cats, we can't move to Bali. That kind of solidified the decision for us. And so, but at the same time, but just as you said, it opened my eyes to this whole world of people that were living, essentially, you hear it all the time, living their best lives, right? They were there. Bali is not incredibly expensive. They were living very well for a lot less, with more free time, with more buying power, currency wise too, right? So here's this, entire world of people that are working with people charging in US dollars and living in Bali where that US dollar goes so far. And Tim Ferriss talks about this in the 4-Hour Work Week, where he talks about, it's not only about working less, but it's also about leveraging your currency. And so I kind of saw it at work. And it was just so eye-opening. And for me, what I realized was I didn't have that freedom. And it wasn't even a matter of I necessarily want to be a digital nomad or I want to not have a home. And I know that there's people who they live unbelievably adventurous lives and they travel from place to place and they conduct their businesses. And it was just even the possibility that that could happen, or that I had that freedom to do something like that, that was incredibly compelling to me. And I think for, like I said before, I'm here and I'm happy, and I'm still living in the house that I bought while I was selling real estate. And it was really my family that brought me back here and that held me here. And I even when we were living in LA, I really think there's a beauty to the ability to dream. We would take a drive to Santa Barbara and we'd say, well, we could live in Santa Barbara, or we could live in Bali, or we could live in Costa Rica. There's like, the possibilities are endless. And I think that there's a beauty to that. But at the end of the day, I'm incredibly close to my parents and my family, and they're here. So are we. And so really, I think that I needed the ability to be able to say, I can go if I need to, or if I want to. And it's the whole idea of alignment again, right? For right now, I feel aligned being here. But 5 years from now, alignment may look like Hong Kong. You never know.
Yeah, I think the alignment piece is so important, because if you're not, I mean, you're just going to be unhappy because there's like something that's just not right.
Mm-hmm.
And, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, sometimes it's just unclear and it's like confusing almost. And it's like angering. I mean, you're kind of like angry, but it's also confusing. It's just like all these things kind of swirling around and you're like, what is going on? But yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I love what you said about you want to have like the freedom to be able to do it, but that doesn't mean just because you can doesn't mean you will, or that, that's the right thing for you at the time, but you want to be able to. And I think that is so important to be able to have those options. And really it's like that gives you a lot of peace, because you know that you're not like stuck in one thing. And I don't know about you, but like just the thought of like being stuck in something that I hate or that I don't like, it makes me crazy. Like just picturing, and I know this is an extreme example, but like picturing being stuck on like a submarine in the tiny little things, and then it's like you can't go anywhere because you're in the submarine and you're like a billion miles under the sea. It's like, oh, that just freaks me out just thinking about it. I'm like, no, get me out.
It's like life claustrophobia.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. No, and I agree with you entirely. I think that and I'm almost I think I'm an extreme example, but I need the freedom. Doesn't necessarily mean I'll exercise it, but I need to know that it's there. I need to know that I'm not tethered. And that if I decide tomorrow that I'm going to go to Italy, that I can go to Italy and that I'm okay, and that I can still keep doing everything that I'm doing, but I'm just going to do it in Italy for a little while because that's where I feel like I need to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Jess, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm so grateful that you would carve out the time to do it. And I've had a lot of fun. I think we talked about some really important things. So thank you very much.
I had a great time. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Then we'll wrap it on up. You mentioned that you were 35, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm 24. And the reason I brought that up was because I think it's very relevant to the question. But what question should I be asking you that I just wouldn't think to ask?
I don't know if it's necessarily a question, but it's something that I think that I'd like to share.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
you never feel ready and you never feel grown up. I still feel like I'm a teenager in like a 35-year-old body with a 35-year-old like life. I joke with my husband all the time that I feel like we're playing house. And I think that that's something that, you know, when I was in my early 20s, I expected that one day it would feel normal, and that one day I would feel like a grown up, and that one day I would feel, this is the other thing too, that, you know, I don't have kids because I've never felt ready, but I know that I want kids. And so you never feel ready. Whatever it is that you want to do down the road, don't wait, because you're never going to feel ready and you're never going to feel grown up enough for it. Where I seriously, I feel like 16-year-old Jess running businesses, and sometimes I still can't believe I'm married. It feels weird. I've been married for 6 years and I still can't believe that I have a husband. So I think that that's probably the one thing that I would say is that, you know, you never feel like you're going to grow, like that you're actually there, but it's just kind of, I guess it's part of the journey.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Jess. I really do appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who's watching and listening. I love y'all very, very much. Y'all the reason that I do this. So thank y'all for being a part of the show and sticking with us all the way to the end here. Your time is very valuable. I'm very grateful that y'all choose to share some of it with us today. So thank you. Thank you again, Jess. And I will see y'all on the next episode. Take care now.